Top 5 album of the year, hands down. Yo guys, what's up? My name is Jaja Prime, here again with another album review. Today we are going to be talking about The Game's latest album, 1992. Now The Game, I'm sure, is an artist who doesn't need much of an introduction. Now with this latest album going into it, I wasn't expecting too much, and certainly with the hype that he tried to, or you could say was successful in creating around the whole Game versus Meek Mill thing, which then turned into Beanie Sigel versus Meek Mill thing. I don't even know how we got to that point. But anyway, certainly with that beef and the hype that he generated, I was hoping that this album would be actually worth the hype. And I can say, in my opinion, that this album justifies all the fuckery that he has done in the past, I don't know, month or so. So going into this album, Game had said 1992 to him was a very instrumental year. You had the Rodney King riots, you had O.J. Simpson. He wanted to sort of capture that year on an album and sort of discuss all the topics that were on there and also his life experiences along with it. So certainly listening to this album, I would say that he was able to do a fantastic job of, articulating all the different things that had happened during that year. Looking at the album cover before we go into the tracks, you have the drawings of O.J. Simpson with the pistol to his head being chased by cops. You have Rodney King being beaten on the floor by police officers. Note the crown on the floor as well. You have a young individual being dragged on both sides by people wearing blue and people wearing red, obviously signifying the Bloods and the Crips. And you also have the year 1992 with the blue and red bandana on it. I'm not exactly sure what the other two individuals represent, but nevertheless, this basically is what you're getting with this album. And I would say this album provides a real insight into street life and sort of gangbanging. Oftentimes people complain about how the gang culture is being over glorified. You have a lot of people talking about having Glocks and having pistols and pistol whipping people, and they don't really tell you the real shit that goes on, the real things that you have to go through when you engage in this gangster lifestyle. And Game does a good job at touching on these various subjects. So I would say with this album, he did a phenomenal job at tying everything together. Speaking of the songs, let's discuss a few of them. The album opens up with the track Savage Lifestyle. Basically, it intros with the reporter narrating the scenes that he's witnessing, and he says, these are scenes you'd normally see in Desert Storm. There's a lovely bridge on here, there's a lovely hook. Everything on here seems well thought out, well structured. The bridge and the slowing of the tempo is a nice little touch. I enjoyed that quite a bit. Track 2, True Colors, or It's On. This song sort of takes a look at the gang culture, the Bloods versus the Crips, more specifically. In the beginning of this track, you hear an individual talk about, what colors are on the American flag, blue, white, and red, and that black people have chosen blue and red and are sort of killing each other. I thought that was an interesting perspective or an interesting analysis of the American flag and the gang situation. Basically, he was talking about how he was born into a life of gang banging and how when he was born, there was a lot of blood. He was born in it, obviously referencing the fact that he is a blood himself. Very nice track again. It gives you a nice insight. Well, I wouldn't say nice, but it gives you an insight into the gang culture and how families can be torn apart by, picking sides or picking what you represent. Also on this track, he talks about how his father had come home one night and was drunk, I believe, and had molested his sister, and he was too young to do anything. He was afraid. None of his brothers were there. Track 4, Fuck Orange Juice. Basically saying on this track, white people are voting for Trump, but they don't really care about black people. They don't care about O.J. Simpson. I'm not exactly sure I got the message behind this track, but certainly I would say this track feels more like an interlude to me than anything else. It wasn't my favorite track on this album, but it was still an okay track to listen to. Still sort of fit in with the narrative of this album overall. Track 5, The Juice, perhaps one of my favorite, if not my favorite track on this album. Basically a very reflective, very somber, very slow track. The singing on here is just lovely, majestic, angelic. You got the juice, baby. I need to stop singing. Yeah, I'll stop singing. So, you know, basically saying you have the juice. When he was born, his mother told him you've got the juice, narrates his own personal experiences, talks about how the world went crazy when he left G Unit, talks about how he got his first album went 5 times platinum, having his first child at 23, and his child's mother saying, you know, you have the juice, and he says, like father, like son. Very nice, very reflective track. And throughout this album, it's just it's very chill. There's nothing on here that tells you Game is trying to go with a particularly, you know, more popular sounding album or something that's gonna bang in the clubs. Track 6, Young Niggas, featuring Lauren Chia. Basically, this song articulates again how Game and his friend had sort of been torn apart due to gang affiliations. His friend, this individual, had been less fortunate than the Game, and I think his family had sort of taken him in as one of their own, and they had done basically everything together. They were the best of friends, and then it comes a time when they have to pick sides, or they join gangs. His friend became a Crip, he became a Blood. He narrates in this song that he never felt any malice towards him, but obviously because of their gang affiliation, they could no longer be friends. He talked about how his friend would be staring him and he'd be like, you better put that blue rag down before I come and bust your ass. But eventually it got into a shootout, and Game was fortunate to not get shot. Another, you know, sadder track. And that's one thing I like about this track, and I don't know if that makes me sound, you know, a certain type of way, but it's good that we have artists sort of come out and talk about the real shit. You know, we talk about how, oh, he's talking about, you know, being a gangbanger, being a thug, he's real. To me, this is more real because you're talking about things that might not be so positive, the real consequences of being a gang member, of having an affiliation, how it can mess up your relationship with your friends, how it can mess up your relationship with your family. And sort of towards the latter end of this album, you know, it takes a drift towards, you know, more love-based tracks. And the track, However Do You Want It, featuring a sample of Soul II Soul's track of the same name, or is it actually called Back to Life. I love this song. I love the interpolation of this sample. I don't know if it's because I love the original Back to Life, but I just love this song. I love this album in general. It gives you a very retro feel. It gives you a real feel. And I would say if people are, you know, I wonder how well this album is going to do, considering how a lot of people complain about new music and they miss the old days. Definitely, I would say listening to this, it's like getting into a time machine and going back in the past, you know, going back to the 90s era. And also, I would say that even though I did not grow up particularly in that era, I was born in 96, I still have an appreciation for this because I was able to relate to a lot of these samples because I grew up on some of these samples. The song Soundtrack is another beautiful song, you know, basically saying The Chronic was a soundtrack to the hood, talking about how Snoop Dogg had made people want to braid their hair, and basically the influence of, you know, Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. So I would say overall with this album, it gives you a very real taste of what it is to be a gangbanger, gives you a nice summary of the year 1992, and it also tells you very personal stories of the Game. So I would say the Game did a great job with this album. I'd give this album a solid 9.5. There were a couple of tracks when it, you know, kind of waddled on. The song What Your Life Like I didn't really like too much, and also Baby You featuring Jason Derulo. My Time Mention, I grew up on Wu-Tang, another favorite. I have a lot of these tracks on this album I enjoyed quite a bit. I grew up on Wu-Tang. It samples the song Cash Rules Everything Around Me, featuring, you know, my favorite Wu-Tang member, Method Man. So definitely this was a great album. 9.5 in my opinion. Definitely a top 5 album contender, and maybe might be not best hip-hop album of this year. I can't really think of anything that I would say was kind of better, but we'll see at the end of the year. By December I'll have my top 10 list. But let me know what your thoughts are on this album. Have you given it a listen? What do you think about the Game's latest project? I'll leave a link where you can go and listen to this album. dope album. Dope meaning love the theme. Everything about this album was pretty much very good, and the production was great, and I don't really have many complaints. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like. If you're new around here, why not click subscribe? My name is Judge Prime. I hope you have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.